the Lord is with thee. Blessed Okay, I'm for now. So we're going to talk about tonight is etiquette and manners. Do you know what those are? Do you know what those are, Brian? What comes to mind when we hear etiquette and manners? When I was younger, it was like, what's that? Marseille, right?
Versailles.
French. Versailles. Some French nobility.
Use the fork on the outside.
Right. Yeah. Extend the pinky fingers. Right. I think that's the general, connotation that comes to mind. Etiquette and manners is something for people who are stuck up, stuffy. It can be useful in polite company, but it doesn't really have any practical purpose in actual everyday life. That is the result of, what could I say? I don't know. I'm going to blame the French Revolution. I'm going to blame the Prussians. Who else am I going to blame?
Satan. The devil.
Well, the devil, sure. I'm going to blame John Dewey as part of it.
Thank you.
I'll blame the communists. Because communism probably actually has a lot to do with it, is communism was very much about economic, material wealth is all that matters. And anything else is superfluous. The German, what could you call that? Oh, I don't know what it was called. Bauhaus architecture, like anything that was like about beauty, or what's practical. What practical purpose does something serve? Part of it in the French Revolution, why they got rid of the contemplative orders, because they didn't do anything. They sat around and prayed all day. What good is that, right? Why aren't they teaching or something like that, right? So etiquette and manners was kind of seen as something superfluous, unnecessary, condescension and haughtiness of an aristocracy that thought it was better than other people, right? That high society. It was a mark of inequality. So those are all kinds of the ideas that have washed down to us today. But, however, I was speaking with one of the instructors at Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary, and I had mentioned to him, I had come across a book on manners, and it connected good manners and courtesy with virtue. And I was asking him about it, and he said, where did Europe where did the aristocracy come from? Where did this idea, in fact, the name courtesy comes out of the word court, the courtly manners, when you were in the presence of the king and the nobility. And he said, well, it didn't originate there. Manners and courtesy originated in Benedictine monasteries, when every monk who joined had a rank in relationship to every other monk. If you joined, every monk that was there before you was above you. Every monk afterwards was below you, except for the priest. The priest was, once you were ordained, now it was every priest ahead of you was above you, every priest was behind you. But it wasn't in any way designed for like the pecking order. It was so that you could know as to Christ. If somebody's above me, I will stand up and offer my seat to them because that person is Christ to me. I will serve them. I will do everything I can for that other person as though they were Christ. So everybody was always looking out for each other in every possible manner. And what you had was, you have the combined perception of a huge number of people and what they're able to perceive another's need as being. I'm sure we've all experienced, we've been around somebody or been in a situation and someone else notices this person needs help, or this person is feeling uncomfortable, or whatever, and we didn't notice. If we had noticed, we would have done something. But that other person just has a better perception than we do. And so what you have in the Benedictine monasteries is, over time, all these thousands and thousands of men and women in the convents noticing others how to notice them as well. And that's called courtesy. It is the combined perception of a bunch of different people noticing how to care for each other. And that was the genesis of courtesy. How that transferred over into the courtly society was that you didn't just have regular people, if we could say that, joining monasteries. The nobility joined the monastery, kings, princes. I think the Benedictines have a record of like, it's huge. It's like 50 kings and 3 emperors became Benedictine monks. That's a testament to the faith. They left everything behind to live in poverty and to serve others as a monk. You had nobility, princes, dukes, I mean, all that whole list of monasteries. But not everybody stayed. So you would have nobility coming, staying, visiting, and going back to court. And having learned, this is how you care for other people. And so that is the genesis of, we could say, high society or manners and etiquette and courtesy. Now, just like any other good thing in life, it's capable of being done poorly. It's capable of becoming a vice. And so this is where you get the snobbery in etiquette and courtesy and manners, and these little rules that are like, what does this mean? Why is that polite and this isn't polite? Kind of a thing. That's the excess of it. The genesis is good, and that is how to make others feel at ease. So I have a few definitions of what is a gentleman, and there are several on that I found, and I'll read just a couple. This one is by John Cardinal Newman, a gentleman. He said, a gentleman is it's almost a definition to say he is one who never inflicts pain. He is mainly occupied in merely removing the obstacles which hinder the free and easy action of those about him, and he concurs with their movements rather than taking the initiative himself. A gentleman is like an easy chair or a good fire, which do their part in bringing comfort and dispelling fatigue. The true gentleman carefully avoids what may ever cause a jar or a jolt in the minds of those with whom he is. All clashing of opinion, collision of feeling, all restraint or suspicion or gloom or resentment. None of these belong to the gentleman. His great concern is to make everyone at ease and at home. He has his eyes on all his company. He is tender towards the bashful, gentle towards the distant, merciful towards the absurd. He can recollect to whom he is speaking. He guards against unreasonable allusions or topics which may irritate. He is seldom prominent in conversation and never wearisome. He makes light of favors while he does them and seems to be receiving when he is giving. He never speaks of himself except when compelled, never defends himself by a mere retort. He has no ears for slander or gossip, interprets everything for the best. He is never mean or little in his disputes, never takes unfair advantage, never mistakes personalities or sharp sayings for arguments, never insinuates evil. From a long-sighted prudence, he considers that we should conduct ourselves towards our enemy as if he were one day to be our friend. He has too much good sense to remember injuries and too indifferent to bear malice. That's a Cliff Notes from John Cardinal Newman. Now, does that sound in any way like unnecessary rules, petty dinner table etiquette kind of a thing? In no way, right? It sounds like someone who is practiced at the virtues. And that is getting back to the true purpose of culture and etiquette. That is the reason and the purpose of it, is to actually help us to grow in virtue. And this is Civility in the old times moved the Catholic man to honor his neighbor with the respect and esteem owed to him, taking into account the factors of gender, status, rank, and profession.
Civility is first and foremost the knowledge and practice of the rules of good treatment that men should observe towards each other in relations of domestic and social life. Not just company behavior, but character behavior. Because the external ways of being and acting reveal either the lowness of soul or the goodness of soul. Bad, vulgar, and sloppy ways are characteristic of egoists. True civility is a virtue. It allows us to be master of ourselves because it demands an assiduous vigilance over words, gestures, and actions. The day-to-day victory over our defects and bad tendencies is what forms good character, a principal element of sociability. Here we go, and elsewhere. Our personal bearing reflects the degree of culture of a person. It is a natural indicator of good or bad education. It is also the external translation of a collection of moral virtues. And it goes on, etc. But I want to impress with these selections and passages that common courtesy and even
that striving to act like a gentleman, striving to acquire good manners is something which is going to help us to achieve sanctity. And we may have never put the two together. But as it said, it requires care in our speech, care in our posture, care in our dress, care in these little day-to-day things that we otherwise would never have thought about. But this is getting at even what the ancients recognized, which was if there is anything possible for a human being to do, it's possible to do well or to do poorly. What are things we do? We eat. There's a good way of eating and a bad way of eating. That should be pretty obvious. Gluttony, or we could say, a healthy eating. A good way of speaking and a poor way of speaking. Gossip, slander, trash talk, as they say, cussing, swearing. These are all bad ways of speaking. Now, a gentleman is not going to do that. Not because he has any particular religious inclination, but because that is not a proper way for a human being to act. And depending on how we've been brought up, we don't even think about that. We think that, well, I'm supposed to do this stuff, but I'm supposed to be like this, but that's not me. I'm not a born saint. This is who I am, so I've just got to embrace it. Not true, right? We need to break out of that way of thinking. A very important point that has been made is that we are all, by adoption, sons and daughters of God. And God, the nobility of God is beyond our comprehension. So if the son or daughter of a king, the son or daughter of a nobleman in this life, is expected to have a higher standard of conduct because of our baptism, that should automatically raise our idea of our standard of conduct. All right, so often our bad behavior stems from a lack of self-respect. It's that I don't respect myself enough not to engage in certain behaviors. I think this was Charles Dickens was quoted with this, or having told his son, "You must always behave as a gentleman towards others, even if they are rude to you. For your gentlemanly behavior is for your sake as much as for theirs." Is that when I am rude to others, that's bad for me. When I lower my standards, that's bad for me. And so a person who understands that, he elevates his standard, he elevates the way he treats everybody. And so many times in marriages, the ways that spouses speak to each other, you shouldn't speak to another human being like that, much less somebody who's supposed to be your closest companion and beloved spouse. Common courtesy would take care of so many marital problems, so many family problems, because when around our family, worst, which unfortunately is oftentimes, that's the true us, right? At our worst, that's the true me. I think it was in the book, the Devotion to the Sacred Heart, and the author says that many people blame illness or sickness on their bad mood, but he said in reality, the illness or sickness removes their ability to pretend, and their bad mood is who they really are. Thomas à Kempis in the Imitation of Christ says, "We do not know what we are until adversity shows. And so a good character, etiquette and virtue in terms of what we've heard, what is a gentleman, what is a man of good breeding, what is a man of good character, is one who in all circumstances elevates himself to a higher standard. And that is going to allow us to achieve a higher level of sanctity. Good so far? I'm covering a lot of different topics. So there's another book, and this is the one that started it all. Thank you. It's called From Temperament to Character. And this is on becoming a virtuous leader. This is by a Frenchman, Alexander Havard. It's like Harvard without the first R. And he brings up a very interesting point, or makes presents a good pattern to follow. And it says everybody in this life is born with a particular temperament, a predisposition towards acting. Some people are naturally affable, others are naturally industrious, some are lazy, some are angry, some are moody. It's just how we naturally are this way. It says, but all of us are called to become. I'm saying what to do is find out, where are my weaknesses, what are my deficiencies of my temperament, and how do I change that into character. Character is are the virtues I have acquired in becoming a man or a woman, in growing up, becoming a gentleman or a lady, a person who has mastered his base passions of anger, greed, whatever it may be. I've mastered those and I've maximized my good qualities. That's character. So from temperament to character is going from what the cards you were dealt, right, your natural dispositions, towards conforming myself to all the virtues. Now he focuses in this book on those virtues necessary for leadership. So it's especially suited to men. Leaders of families, leaders of communities, and I would say leaders by example, especially when men are attacked. Masculinity, proper masculinity, is attacked on all sides. Knowing how to be a leader is very important, and especially knowing how to be a gentleman is gonna go fit hand in glove. I would complain about, let's see, if Donald Trump wasn't such a buffoon, he'd be twice as effective, right? But he thinks that is his way of connecting with people, I would say. This kind of low-born tactic or manner. If he had gentlemanly qualities, it would be so much easier for him to do whatever it is he wants to do. That would be an example of...
Sorry, Father. It's compounded by the fact that his buffoonery is giving bad example.
Okay, good point. It's not just making his job harder, it's giving bad example. That is not the proper way to act, especially from somebody who should be the consummate gentleman. What is it? Satan himself can be the perfect gentleman when he needs to be. Because it simply achieves results. When we're gentlemen, other people, it's kind of like if you go to a restaurant and there's a really good waiter, you don't notice the waiter until after you've left. And you say, that was a really good meal. Like, it was excellent. You didn't notice the waiter doing his job. He was so good at it. You just noticed that everything was there on time. It flowed smoothly. He was never obtrusive. And afterward, you go back to that restaurant. Being a gentleman, it's like after people have known you for a while, they just have the greatest admiration and respect. There's nothing that jumps out right away, or there shouldn't be, because that is what we call ostentatious. It's designed to gain attraction, but it's afterwards people admire and they respect you and they want to be like you, and that's what becoming a gentleman, acquiring manners and courtesy does. And how important for people to wonder, how is that man, how is that person so much different? And they find out you're Catholic, and you're a devout Catholic, and you pray the rosary every day, and the reason you've acquired virtue or courtesy is not to stand out, but to be pleasing to God, but to become a saint. And then that really impacts people. That allows God the space to dump grace on people and convert them. So tremendously powerful. Boy, this book is very concisely written, but I would highly suggest picking up a copy of this. We'll hold it around, you're going to see. I'll send it out a link also from Temperament to Character, but it goes through and describes the virtues. It describes how to distinguish them, because that's a very important thing, actually. The ancients recognize this also. Say with every virtue, virtue's in the middle, and there's an excess and a defect. So for the virtue of courage, that is pressing forward for a noble cause despite your own fear. That's courage. What's the opposite of courage? Cowardice, right? It's shrinking from danger because of the fear, even though there's a great reason that I should go forward. That's a coward. What's the other opposite? That's foolhardiness, brashness, rashness, which is charging heedless into danger without considering what's the necessity. Is there a better way to do this? It's a kind of a reckless desire for glory, or a careless disregard for one's own life. And that is not a virtue. Recklessness can be due to a temperament. Some people are just naturally actually perceive the danger, or they don't sufficiently value their life or whatever it may be. So to acquire courage takes work no matter what side you're on. So he goes through that with the virtues of humility, magnanimity, justice, temperance, prudence. All these things in this book he describes. This is the virtue, here's the excess, here's the deficiency. Just for another example, prudence. Prudence is the virtue of making the right decision. Very important for those who are leaders. In a decision-making capacity, how should we discipline the kids? What should we do with regards to finances? Prudence. The excess of prudence is indecisiveness. You're always thinking, always deliberating. You're never making a decision because you're always trying to consider what's the best one. The lack of prudence, we could say, is carelessness. You don't think about it. There's no plan. You're just like, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. Instant decisions without thinking it through. So there would be another example of how he distinguishes for all those virtues. So I would suggest this as a way to develop that character as part of striving to become mature human beings, mature male Homo sapiens, right? In more than body. So now I'm going to switch to another book, and this one is called The Holy Spirit by Edward Lean, S.J. These are in the good old days. This was like 70 years ago, so here's a good one. Now what struck me was this particular chapter, which I opened up accidentally, and I just happened to fall upon this chapter, and it's the only chapter in the book that I found so far dedicated to this topic, and it's about maturity in spirit. And he's a very good writer. As he talks about, well, I'll start. There is no living creature that attain to the fullest development of which it is capable. Creation, throughout its whole life, is submitted to the law of growth and progress. And so the same is true of human beings. No child of human parents is born a man. He comes into the world equipped with the nature and the powers through which he can achieve manhood, but he is not born a man. Now, it is scarcely necessary to remark that the acquisition of virile strength, balanced physical energies, the physical qualities of growth, this is the least important aspect of manhood. It is the soul, rather than the body, that lie the vital elements that germinate into human perfection. Development of firm and constant rational control over the tendencies and impulses he finds in himself, over his passions, this is what truly makes him a man. The moralists speak of this as the acquisition of the moral virtues. So this is manhood, is acquiring the power of my reason over my passions, of rationality over emotion. This is manhood. This is maturity. And I'm going to paraphrase this here, but he says that had mankind not been given a supernatural goal, the fullest development of his natural faculties would have been the highest end of mankind. Our highest end would have been developing our mind and our soul and our characters into the virtues. That would be it. That would be the summation of human nature. And I would remark very interestingly, every human being, when he thinks of heaven, is actually thinking of limbo. Because we can only imagine the limits of our nature. And heaven surpasses our natural powers. That's what heaven is defined as, the possession of the beatific vision. We must be given a supernatural power to understand heaven. And we don't have that yet. So when we think of heaven, we're thinking of a place of perfect natural happiness. That would have been our end had God not given us supernatural life. Man can bring himself towards that final perfection, which consists in such contemplation of the divine as is possible to man, confined within his natural range of his abilities. In this contemplation, Aristotle, the philosopher, places human happiness. This happiness would be the normal consequence of the acquisition of the moral virtues that would go to constitute the perfect man. It would constitute the final end had man been created for a natural and not a supernatural destiny. My point in bringing that up is grace builds on nature. Grace does not erase nature. Grace does not replace our nature. Grace builds upon it. And so for a man who has worked at the perfection of natural virtues, grace will have a very, very easy time making him a saint. There's an example of just such a man to whom this happened. St. Ambrose, you recall, in the 3rd century. St. Ambrose was the son of a Roman prefect, a governor. He was trained in all the moral virtues from his youth: courtesy, civility, the best of Roman culture. He became a governor himself, the governor of Milan, Italy. And he was not married, became governor of the city when he was in his 20s, and continued very well, and in fact became a catechumen. At that time there was the Arian heresy going on, and the Catholic bishop died, and the Arians were clamoring they wanted an Arian bishop appointed to the position. The Catholics wanted the Catholic bishop, and so there was this contention back and forth who the bishop was going to be. Ambrose realizes, as the prefect of the city, the governor, there's a civil disturbance, there's like a riot in front of the church, so he goes out to quell the riot. And he addresses the crowd, and he speaks so eloquently and so well and with such calm that the legend has it, at a pause in his oratory, a young boy calls out, "Ambrose for bishop." And the crowd takes it up, "Ambrose for bishop, Ambrose," and they all start shouting, "You be the bishop." And he was horrified. So he runs and hides in the house of a friend of his, another Roman prefect, and the prefect writes to the emperor and says, what should we do? And the emperor was flattered that the Christians would think so highly of one of his Roman governors that they would want to make him one of their governors. So he said, he has my full approval. So his friend sells him out to the Catholics, and in a week he goes from a pagan to a bishop. He was baptized, confirmed, given porter, lector, exorcist, acolyte, holy orders, deacon, subdeacon, priest, and bishop, all in 1 week. Every single day was like a full, round of ordinations. And so he went from being a pagan to being a bishop in 1 week. And after he became a bishop, he sold all of his possessions, gave all of his money to the poor, lived in austerity, and completely devoted himself to being a bishop. He was a saint almost from day one, because he had the perfection of those natural virtues. He had worked on them as a pagan and acquired discipline, self-control, courtesy, kindness, all these things that unbaptized people recognize this is a good way of acting. Possessing those, grace came down upon him and turned him into a saint. So that is what the study of virtue and courtesy and etiquette can do for us. It is like holding a microscope up to kindness and saying, just how kind are you? How kinder could you be if you applied yourself? How attentive to others are you? How attentive are you to yourself? Right? How much self-respect do you have? No self-respecting gentleman would say this, do this, sit that way, act this way, eat this way. And all those things are going to ennoble us. And especially if we are leaders of a family or whatever, we're going to bring others with us. So for all of those reasons, I would say etiquette, courtesy, kindness, being a gentleman is one of the most overlooked avenues of sanctity in our modern era. This was well understood in previous times, but today it's fallen off. It's fallen out of the radar. So I would like to encourage you to look that up. Now there's a lot out there. I looked online, how to be a gentleman, what does it mean to be a gentleman, YouTube videos, this kind of thing. You kind of have to piece it together. It's like you're like a Catholic Frankenstein. You're pulling together something from here, because you get foppery, you get people. A gentleman means all this stuff that it really isn't a virtue. But if you have an eye that you're looking to improve yourself, your consideration of others, the way that you dress, speak, and act for the sake of others, you'll do well. But I would like to challenge all of you to think about that, especially in those areas of speaking, dressing, acting, and thinking. How can I improve that? How can I become a gentleman in my own mind and raise my character to take my initial impressions, good or bad, and refine them and bring them to a higher level for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of sanctity, for the sake of myself and my family. That's the challenge I would like to throw out there.
Got a little question.
Yes, let me end my presentation there. So thank you. Okay, there we go.